The man who kept checking the hallway. According to the official police report, there was no sign of forced entry, no damaged locks, no unknown fingerprints, no evidence that anyone had ever entered apartment 8C. Yet over the course of 93 days, David Collins called emergency services 23 times with the exact same statement. Someone is standing outside my door. Every responding officer found the hallway completely empty. The case might have been forgotten if security footage hadn't revealed something impossible to ignore. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., David slowly opened his apartment door, stared into the empty hallway for nearly 60 seconds, and then stepped backward as if someone were standing directly in front of him. He appeared to whisper. No second person ever appeared on camera. David Collins was 36 years old and worked as an administrative office assistant for a logistics company in Chicago. His life was built on routines. Wake up at 6:30, coffee at 6:45, leave at 7:20, arrive at work 15 minutes early, lunch at exactly noon, return home before 6. His coworkers described him as dependable. His supervisor described him as meticulous. David simply believed that everything should stay exactly where it belonged. His apartment reflected that belief. Every chair was perfectly aligned with the table. Every book was organized by height. Every pair of shoes pointed in the same direction. Order made him feel safe. Chaos made him uncomfortable. Nothing more. At least, that's what he believed. One rainy Tuesday evening, David returned home and noticed something almost meaningless. The doormat outside his apartment looked slightly crooked. Not much. Maybe an inch. Maybe less. His neighbor laughed when David mentioned it. The cleaning crew probably bumped it. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. David straightened the mat and went inside. 10 minutes later, he opened the door again. It still looked crooked. He adjusted it. 5 minutes later, he checked again. Before going to bed, he had opened his front door 11 times. The next morning, he felt exhausted, but one thought refused to leave his mind. What if someone was moving it on purpose? David began taking photographs of the hallway every night. He compared each image with the previous one. The position of the mat, the reflection from the ceiling light, the shadow beneath the fire extinguisher. Every tiny detail became evidence. When nothing changed, he felt relief. For a few minutes. Then doubt returned. He placed invisible pencil marks beneath the edge of the doormat. The marks never moved. He replaced them with transparent tape. The tape remained untouched. Still, every morning the mat somehow looked different. He bought a laser level, then a measuring ruler, then software that compared two photographs pixel by pixel. Each new solution only created another reason to keep checking. Weeks passed. David stopped accepting invitations from friends. He rushed home immediately after work. He installed one security camera facing the hallway, then another facing his front door, then a third camera recording the first two cameras. Every night, he watched hours of footage. Most people would have seen absolutely nothing. David noticed everything. A shadow that seemed longer than yesterday, an elevator door staying open for 2 seconds too long, a flickering hallway light, a reflection that disappeared before he could identify it. His coworkers noticed dark circles under his eyes. His manager suggested taking a vacation. David smiled politely, then went home to review 6 more hours of security footage. Sleep slowly disappeared. David started hearing footsteps outside his apartment. Sometimes they stopped directly in front of his door. He counted silently. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. If the sound lasted longer than 5 seconds, someone had to be standing there. One night he counted all the way to 32. His heart pounded as he unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. Still, he could have sworn he smelled unfamiliar perfume. The scent vanished before sunrise. He began questioning his own memory. Did he actually smell anything? Or had his mind simply decided that he should? He no longer knew. David's mother called to ask why he sounded tired. He insisted everything was fine. His closest friends stopped inviting him out. His apartment became both his refuge and his prison. At work, he made his first serious filing mistake in 7 years. A shipment worth thousands of dollars was delayed because he entered the wrong tracking number. His supervisor insisted he see a doctor. David agreed. But on the way home, he bought another security camera instead, because the problem wasn't stress. The problem was that he wasn't watching carefully enough. Soon David could recognize every ordinary sound inside the building: the elevator motor, water pipes, air conditioning, neighbors locking their doors. Yet each familiar noise slowly transformed into something threatening. Every distant footstep sounded like someone approaching his apartment. Every silence felt intentional. He began standing behind his front door every night, listening, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. According to neighbors, they occasionally heard him whisper, "I know you're still there." No one ever answered. His therapist later noted that David never claimed to see anyone, only that he constantly felt he was 1 second away from seeing someone. That anticipation became stronger than reality itself. 3 months after the first emergency call, police were asked to perform a welfare check. They found David sitting on the floor of his apartment. Every security monitor was still running. Every hallway recording had been saved. More than 400 hours of identical footage. Nothing unusual appeared. No strangers, no suspicious movement, no evidence of stalking. The case was officially attributed to severe anxiety, obsessive-compulsive behavior, chronic sleep deprivation, and paranoid thinking. It should have ended there. Months later, an investigative journalist requested copies of the building's archived security footage. Frame by frame, everything appeared ordinary, except for one detail. Every night, David opened his door at exactly 2:17 a.m., and every night, the digital timestamp jumped from 2:16:59 directly to 2:17:01. Exactly 1 second was missing. Building technicians explained it as a harmless synchronization error common in older surveillance systems. Their explanation made perfect sense. What nobody could explain was why the missing second appeared only on the nights David stood silently in the hallway, staring at absolutely nothing. The apartment has since been rented to someone else. According to neighbors, the new tenant has developed an unusual habit. Every night before going to bed, he opens the front door one last time, just to make sure the hallway is empty. The woman who couldn't stop checking. At 3:17 a.m. on October 27, 2021, officers responded to a disturbance call from a residential building in Southwark, London. The caller never reported screams. There were no sounds of violence. Only one detail repeated over and over. The woman in 4B has been opening and locking her front door for hours. When officers arrived, they found the apartment door partially open. The lock showed no signs of damage, no evidence of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had ever tried to get inside. The resident, 32-year-old data analyst Eleanor Vance, was discovered sitting on the floor just a few feet from the entrance. She was alive, severely dehydrated, and physically exhausted. Inside the apartment, investigators documented something they would later describe as an environment organized around a single ritual. Every light switch had visible fingerprints. Every window latch had been tested repeatedly. Every kitchen appliance was unplugged. On the dining table sat 6 notebooks. Each contained hundreds of identical handwritten entries. I checked it. The final page was different. Written with noticeably heavier pressure, it read, "If I already checked it, why can't I remember?" That question would become the center of an investigation that blurred the line between obsessive certainty and complete psychological collapse. For most of her adult life, Eleanor appeared remarkably ordinary. She worked as a senior data analyst for a successful technology company. She arrived early, never missed deadlines, paid every bill before it was due. Her apartment was spotless without feeling unnatural. Friends described her as dependable. Coworkers trusted her with projects requiring extraordinary attention to detail. Nothing about her suggested instability. If anything, Eleanor seemed unusually composed, which is why nobody noticed when caution quietly transformed into ritual. It began with a second glance at the front door, then another, then one more, just to be absolutely certain. No one could remember exactly when the habit stopped being practical and started becoming necessary. Not even Eleanor. Official records list the incident as a severe psychological collapse associated with obsessive-compulsive behavior, chronic anxiety, and prolonged sleep deprivation. No criminal investigation remained open. No evidence of stalking was ever found. No signs of forced entry were documented. 3 independent psychiatrists reached nearly identical conclusions. Every strange event could be explained. Every unexplained feeling could be attributed to exhaustion. Every memory distortion could be linked to stress. The case should have ended there. Months later, while preparing the apartment for a new tenant, a maintenance worker replaced the damaged front lock. Inside the mechanism, investigators found unusual wear patterns. According to the manufacturer's report, the lock had been engaged and disengaged thousands of times in a matter of weeks, far beyond normal residential use. Nothing about that finding was mysterious, except for one detail. The final police inventory included Eleanor's personal notebook. Its last page had already been photographed the night officers entered the apartment. The original photograph clearly shows one sentence: "If I already checked it, why can't I remember?" When the notebook was archived 48 hours later, investigators noticed an additional line beneath it, written in the same handwriting, using the same pen, with no indication of when it had been added. "I checked one last time. The door was already open." The evidence log lists no explanation. The case remains closed. File number 72B. In the spring of 2022, Lena Fischer began noticing small mistakes in her work. At least, that's what she believed they were. Lena was 32 years old and worked in the municipal archives of Hamburg, Germany. Her job was simple. Thousands of government documents arrived every month from various departments across the city. Old reports, permits, property records, court filings, administrative correspondence. Most people would have found the work unbearably repetitive. Lena enjoyed it. There was comfort in order. Every document had a place. Every file belonged somewhere. For nearly 6 years, she had spent her days in a climate-controlled archive building on the edge of the city. Nothing unusual had ever happened there, until she came across a file labeled 72B. The folder was tucked inside a box of records scheduled for digitization. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. A collection of missing person reports spanning several decades. Some dated back to the 1970s. Others were far more recent. There was nothing remarkable about the contents. People disappear every year. Most reports were only a few pages long. A photograph, basic identifying information, the circumstances of disappearance. The folder contained dozens of unrelated cases, or at least it appeared that way. Lena processed the file and returned it to storage. That should have been the end of it. The following week, she opened it again while reviewing inventory records. Something felt wrong. The folder seemed thicker, not dramatically, just enough to catch her attention. She assumed she was mistaken. Still, curiosity led her to flip through the pages. She didn't recognize several reports. One file described a teenager who had vanished in 1988. Another concerned an elderly woman reported missing in 2004. Lena was almost certain neither document had been there before. She blamed her memory. Archive work involved thousands of pages every day. No one could remember them all. Yet the feeling persisted. The next evening, before leaving work, she photographed every page in file 72B using her phone. It seemed ridiculous, but she wanted reassurance. The following morning, she compared the photographs to the physical documents. At first, everything matched. Then she noticed a discrepancy. One report contained a different address, another listed a different date. The changes were minor. The typeface remained the same. The paper appeared identical. Only specific details had changed. Lena spent the entire afternoon checking her photographs. She became convinced she wasn't imagining it. When she reported the issue to her supervisor, Carl Neumann, he seemed puzzled. Carl had worked in the archives for over 30 years. He reviewed the folder personally. Nothing appeared unusual. No missing pages, no evidence of tampering, no discrepancies. Everything matched the official inventory. If something had been added, Carl said, the catalog would show it. The catalog showed nothing. The folder contained exactly the number of documents it was supposed to contain. Lena tried to move on, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Weeks passed. She continued photographing the file whenever she handled it. The differences became harder to ignore. Reports appeared where no reports had existed before. Dates shifted. Entire names changed. Sometimes she would discover a document in the folder that she had no memory of seeing. Then she would check an older photograph and find that the document had apparently been there all along. The contradictions began affecting her life outside work. She stopped sleeping properly, forgot appointments, missed phone calls from friends. She found herself rereading old text messages because she could no longer trust her memory. One evening, she became convinced she had already eaten dinner. Hours later, she discovered the meal untouched in her refrigerator. Her anxiety worsened. Then she noticed something far more disturbing. Several names in File 72B seemed familiar. At first, she couldn't understand why. Then she found a missing person report from 1996. The subject had attended the same elementary school she had attended years later. Another report listed an apartment building where her family had once lived. A third involved a neighborhood she had walked through every day as a teenager. Coincidences, perhaps. Hamburg was a large city. Connections were inevitable, but the pattern continued. The more documents appeared, the more personal the connections became. One report referenced a small grocery store near her childhood home. Another listed a street where her grandmother had lived. Lena became obsessed. She began spending evenings researching the names. Most led nowhere. Old newspaper clippings, archived records, dead ends. Yet occasionally she found evidence that the people had genuinely existed. That realization made everything worse, because it meant at least some of the reports were real. Months later, after concerns about her well-being were raised by coworkers, Lena agreed to undergo a psychological evaluation. The assessment was conducted by forensic psychologist Dr. Jonas Weber. His conclusions were straightforward. Chronic stress, sleep deprivation, social isolation, obsessive behavioral patterns. According to the report, Lena had likely developed an unhealthy fixation on routine discrepancies that most people would have ignored. Her perception of changes within the file may have been influenced by memory distortions associated with prolonged stress. The explanation sounded reasonable. Even Lena admitted it was possible. Shortly afterward, she resigned from her position. The matter appeared resolved, until someone attempted to locate File 72B. Several months after Lena left the archives, an internal review was conducted during a digitization project. Employees searched for the folder. They could not find it. At first, they assumed it had been misplaced. Then they checked the inventory database. No record existed. Not only was the file missing, according to the archive system, it had never been registered at all. The catalog number did not correspond to any active record. Carl Newman insisted he remembered the folder, at least he thought he did. Yet no paperwork confirmed its existence. No borrowing records, no transfer forms, nothing. Years later, a local investigative journalist became interested in the story after discovering references to Lena's psychological evaluation. He attempted to trace File 72B. The search led to a strange discovery. Archive number 72-B had indeed existed decades earlier, but according to surviving records, it had been assigned to an entirely different collection of municipal budget documents. Those records had no connection to missing persons, no connection to Lena, and no connection to any of the names she claimed to have found. The journalist eventually abandoned the investigation. There was simply not enough evidence. Today, the story survives only in scattered notes, second-hand accounts, and archived emails. Some believe Lena became overwhelmed by years of repetitive work and gradually lost trust in her own memory. Others suspect bureaucratic errors buried the truth long before anyone noticed. No one has ever proven either explanation, and because File 72B cannot be located, no one can verify what was actually inside it, or whether it ever existed at all. The night shift records. For nearly 4 years, Daniel Hartman worked the night shift at one of the largest logistics distribution centers outside Rotterdam. His routine never changed. Clock in at 10 p.m., scan packages, update inventory records, take a coffee break at 2 a.m., go home before sunrise. The job wasn't exciting, but it was stable. The building itself never truly slept. Thousands of packages moved through the facility every night. Conveyor belts hummed constantly. Forklifts crossed vast warehouse aisles under fluorescent lights. Most employees worked alone for hours at a time. Daniel liked that. He wasn't particularly social, and the quiet suited him. Everything remained normal until he received an email from Human Resources. The message informed him that he had repeatedly left his assigned work area without authorization during operating hours. At first, Daniel assumed it was a mistake. He replied, explaining that he hadn't left his station. A few days later, his supervisor, Emma Richardson, asked him to stop by her office. She showed him access records from the facility's security system. According to the logs, Daniel's employee badge had been used to enter a restricted storage section 7 times over the previous 2 months. What bothered him wasn't just the entries themselves. It was the timing. Every single access occurred between 3:17 and 3:26 a.m., the exact same window, every time. Daniel stared at the screen. There has to be a system error. Emma didn't argue, but she looked concerned. The security department reviewed surveillance footage connected to the incidents. The recordings showed a warehouse employee entering the restricted area. The person wore Daniel's uniform, used Daniel's badge, had Daniel's height and build, but the camera quality was poor. The face was impossible to identify with certainty. Security could neither confirm nor rule out that it was him. Emma suggested he take a few personal days. Several coworkers, she said, had mentioned that he seemed exhausted lately. Daniel declined. He didn't feel exhausted, at least not then. But over the following weeks, small things began to bother him. He found empty energy drink cans in his locker and couldn't remember buying them. His lunch container was occasionally empty before he reached his break. One morning he discovered dried mud on his work boots despite spending the entire shift indoors. Each incident was minor. Individually they meant nothing. Together they made him uncomfortable. For the first time, Daniel began doubting his own memory. He purchased a small notebook. Every hour of every shift was documented. Bathroom breaks, coffee breaks, phone calls, equipment checks, arrival times, departure times, anything that might help him establish a reliable timeline. The notebook quickly became an obsession. At first, the records reassured him. Then they started creating new questions. Some entries appeared in handwriting that looked exactly like his own, yet he had no memory of writing them. The ink was different. The pressure on the page was slightly heavier. One evening, before starting work, he wrote a note across the top of a blank page: "Do not leave your station." A few hours later, he opened the notebook again. Beneath the message was a second line: "I never did." The handwriting looked identical. Daniel couldn't remember writing it. That night he barely slept. The following week, he began recording portions of his shift using his phone. Most videos were uneventful: hours of conveyor belts, warehouse noise, workers moving pallets. Then one recording stood out. The video lasted 43 minutes. The timestamp never stopped. The file wasn't corrupted, but for approximately 9 minutes, Daniel was nowhere in frame. The camera remained pointed at an empty corridor. The recording continued uninterrupted. He had no recollection of leaving, no memory of returning, nothing. At that point, Daniel contacted Peter Van Dyke, the facility's head of security. Peter had worked at the distribution center for over 20 years. He listened patiently. Unlike most people, he didn't immediately dismiss Daniel's concerns. Instead, he helped review archived security reports. During the search, they discovered something unusual. 2 employees had reported similar incidents years earlier. Both worked night shifts. Both claimed their access cards had been used without explanation. Both resigned before internal investigations concluded. Neither case had an official resolution. Daniel became increasingly consumed by the mystery. He arrived early, stayed late, skipped breaks. He searched areas connected to the access logs, loading docks, storage rooms, maintenance corridors, anywhere the badge records indicated he had supposedly been. Then one night, he found something he couldn't explain. While reviewing archived security photographs, he came across an image taken 6 months before his employment began. The photograph showed a worker standing at the end of a service corridor. The image quality was poor. The figure was partially obscured, yet the resemblance was difficult to ignore. Same height, same posture, same facial structure. At first, Daniel assumed it was coincidence, but the longer he looked, the less certain he became. According to company records, he had never worked there when the photo was taken. In fact, he hadn't even lived in Rotterdam yet. An internal audit was eventually completed. The final conclusion was unsatisfying. Investigators cited insufficient evidence, possible access control errors, and the inability to positively identify individuals in surveillance footage. The case was closed. Several months later, Daniel resigned. He moved to another city and left night shift work behind entirely. The story might have ended there, except for one detail, a detail buried deep within an internal report that was never publicly released. During the final weeks of the investigation, Daniel's access badge was used 3 additional times. Each entry occurred at exactly 3:17 a.m. Security logs confirmed it. The problem was that Daniel was not at work. Location data from his phone placed him inside his apartment nearly 20 kilometers away. There was no evidence of hacking, no evidence that his badge had been cloned, no evidence of unauthorized access to the security database. No suspect was ever identified. Years later, a local journalist attempted to investigate the incident. Most records had already been destroyed under routine data retention policies. Emma Richardson declined interview requests. Peter Van Dyke had retired, and Daniel Hartman never responded to any attempts at contact. Today, the case survives only as a brief mention in archived internal documentation. Perhaps it was nothing more than a series of administrative errors. Perhaps years of overnight work had affected Daniel's memory in ways no one fully understood. Or perhaps there was another explanation, one that nobody ever managed to prove. Either way, every documented access occurred at exactly 3:17 a.m., and no one has ever explained why. Low apartment. In the spring of 2023, Ethan Mill had not left his apartment building in nearly 4 months. He wasn't afraid of the outside world, at least, that's what he told himself. The habit had started during the pandemic and never really ended. He worked remotely for a software company based in Denver. Groceries were delivered. Prescriptions arrived by mail. His life had gradually shrunk to a 1-bedroom apartment on the 8th floor of an aging residential building outside Cleveland. Most days followed the same routine. Wake up, coffee, work, dinner, sleep. The repetition was comforting, predictable, safe. The building itself was quiet. Most residents kept to themselves. The only people Ethan recognized were Sarah Cawley from apartment 811 and David Romero, the maintenance supervisor who had worked there for years. Nothing about the place felt unusual, until a leaking pipe under Ethan's bathroom sink forced him to contact management. A few days later, David repaired the problem. The visit lasted less than 15 minutes. Before leaving, David asked Ethan to sign a digital work order on a tablet. Ethan signed. The matter seemed finished. 3 weeks later, management accidentally emailed Ethan a folder containing maintenance records associated with his unit. He only opened the files because he wanted a copy of the plumbing report. Instead, he found dozens of entries. His name appeared everywhere, not just on plumbing requests, inspection logs, fire safety checks, electrical audits, utility room access reports. The entries stretched back almost 2 years. Each one stated that Ethan Mill had personally accompanied maintenance staff during inspections throughout the building. He stared at the dates. Many occurred during periods when he knew he had not left his apartment. One report claimed he had joined a boiler inspection at 6:10 a.m. Another stated he had assisted maintenance personnel during a water shutoff on the 7th floor. A third recorded him entering a restricted storage room. Each report contained a signature. His signature, not similar, identical. At first, Ethan assumed it was a clerical mistake. The office had mixed up records. That happened. He called management. They apologized and promised to investigate. 2 days later, they called back. According to their records, no error existed. Every signature had been verified during audits. Every document was legitimate. The employee sounded confused by Ethan's concerns. "If you're saying those aren't yours, sir, then I don't know what to tell you." That night, Ethan barely slept. The situation irritated him more than frightened him, until he started comparing dates. Many reports occurred late at night, some after midnight, several between 2 and 4 in the morning, hours he was supposedly asleep. The next morning he purchased a video doorbell camera, mostly for peace of mind. The camera recorded continuously. Nothing unusual happened for nearly 2 weeks. Then Sarah mentioned something strange. They met near the mailboxes. Casual conversation, nothing important. Before walking away, she paused. "You've been doing better lately." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've seen you out more," she smiled. "At night." The smile disappeared when she noticed his expression. "I haven't been out at night." Sarah looked uncertain. Maybe it wasn't you, but she didn't sound convinced. The conversation bothered him all day. That evening, Ethan reviewed every second of footage stored on his camera. Hours passed. Then he found it. 2:43 a.m., a timestamp from 6 nights earlier. His apartment door opened. A man stepped into the hallway. The image quality was poor, the hallway lights were dim, but the man's height, build, clothing, and face appeared identical to Ethan's. The figure walked calmly toward the stairwell. The door closed behind him. 4 hours later, the same person returned, entered apartment 816, and disappeared inside. Ethan watched the clip at least 20 times. His stomach tightened. He had absolutely no memory of it. He checked his phone's health data. The sleep tracker recorded uninterrupted sleep that entire night. He checked work messages. Nothing unusual. No signs of insomnia. No signs of sleepwalking. No evidence of anything. For the first time in years, Ethan scheduled an appointment with a psychologist. The psychologist suggested stress, isolation, possible episodes of dissociation. The explanation sounded reasonable, until another report appeared. This time management contacted him directly. An inspection had occurred in a vacant apartment on the 8th floor, Unit 814. The report listed Ethan as a witness. Again, the problem was simple. Unit 814 was empty. It had been empty since before Ethan moved into the building. That evening he asked Sarah about it. She immediately recognized the number. "That's weird." "What?" "When I've seen you at night," she hesitated, "it always looked like you were coming from 8 and 14. A cold sensation spread through Ethan's chest. The next day he requested access records. Management refused. Privacy policy. Legal concerns. The usual answers. So he began watching the hallway himself every night, sometimes until sunrise. His work performance suffered. His sleep schedule collapsed. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Then, shortly after 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning, he saw movement. A door opening, not his. Unit 814. A unit that was supposed to be vacant. Someone emerged. The hallway was dark. The person moved slowly toward the stairwell. Ethan followed. By the time he reached the hallway, nobody was there. The door to 814 stood slightly open. He called out. No answer. The apartment was unfurnished, empty. Dust covered the floor. No food, no clothing, no signs of occupation. But in the center of the living room sat a folding table, and on top of it rested a thick stack of maintenance reports. Hundreds of pages. Every one of them carried his name, his signature, his involvement. The oldest report was dated nearly 3 years before he moved into the building, before his lease, before his employment records showed him living in Ohio at all. Yet there it was, Ethan Mill, witness, present, authorized, accompanied inspection. Again, again, again. The same name repeating through years of paperwork. He heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy footsteps, approaching. When he stepped outside, David Romero was standing near the stairwell. Neither man spoke for several seconds. David looked tired, more tired than surprised. Finally, he asked a question. "What are you doing in there?" Ethan held up the reports. "Who signed these?" David stared at the papers, then at Ethan. His expression became difficult to read, almost concerned. "Maybe you should go back to your apartment." "Answer me." David said nothing. The silence lasted so long that Ethan eventually left. The following morning, he contacted building ownership, corporate management, local authorities, even a reporter from a regional newspaper. Nobody seemed interested. There was no crime, no missing person, no financial fraud, just paperwork. A month later, Ethan moved out. According to neighbors, he left abruptly. According to management, he never filed a complaint. According to public records, no investigation was ever opened. Years later, fragments of the story surfaced online. Former residents discussed strange maintenance logs. Several claimed they had found their names attached to inspections they did not remember attending. Others suggested mass clerical errors. A few blamed faulty software used during the pandemic. One commenter claimed Ethan suffered a documented dissociative disorder. No evidence was provided. The building still operates today. Unit 814 remains officially vacant. And if the reports are genuine, maintenance records show that Ethan Mill continued accompanying inspections for nearly 7 months after he moved away. No one has ever explained why or who signed the forms.